and welcome to No Notes, the show where three cerebral cinephiles take a break from chatting guilty pleasures to discuss cinematic treasures. Each month, we'll take turns selecting a film we believe to be virtually flawless, one that had a significant impact on our lives and or helped shape the film lovers we became. If you love movies, if you really love movies, this is the show for you.
Thanksgiving, you've been dealt a hard hand. Caught between your high-maintenance siblings, overshadowed by Halloween, that messy goth bitch with her costumes and candy, passed over for Christmas and her twinkling lights and shiny presents. Doesn't leave much space or attention for a low-key middle child who really wants nothing more than to eat themselves into a food coma, maybe take a little nap on the couch, and to just, generally speaking, play it cool. Mind her own. Luckily, we here on No Notes, well, we get it. We're here to celebrate you, poor, forgotten middle child, with your unbrushed hair, your baggy pajama bottoms, and your half-assed inflatable yard turkeys. And we are, specifically, here to praise an all-time holiday classic, the unspeakably great Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So grab a glass of wine, or even some premature eggnog, if you prefer your drinks gross and viscous, and join us, Stephs, Kells, and Jackamobiles, as we dive into this unmissable Thanksgiving favorite on today's episode of No Notes. So Kelly, you're asking why Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. My family takes Christmas pretty seriously. I'm a Halloween girl myself, but my little Grinch heart does tend to grow at least 2.5, if not fully 3 sizes at Christmas. However, I'm a big believer in giving each holiday its due, and Thanksgiving is nice. It's a good chance to get a little day drunk and eat a little too much, get a little sleepy, and just truly be the fat load you want to see in the world. As may be incredibly apparent, I don't cook. I don't want to, but I'm also not allowed to. There's a pretty massive black hole where the Thanksgiving movie should be. Sure, we've got Thanksgiving and blood rage, and trust that I love that silly nonsense. But a few years ago, I talked my John Candy-averse mother into rewatching a movie she told me she didn't care for. The John Hughes classic, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm not sure who was more shocked to discover she loved it on the second viewing, me or her. But as for me, I was instantly smitten. I love Steve Martin with a wild, rabid passion, especially when he's playing a tightly strung and a little bit neurotic. But what struck me the most, and what keeps me coming back year after year after year, is the unironic, uncynical streak of pure humanity and kindness that pilots the movie. I've seen a million Hallmark Christmas movies that don't understand what Planes, Trains, and Automobiles comprehends at a bone-deep genetic level. Every action is more compelling, more moving, when it's anchored in fully realized and developed characters. John Hughes wrote a beautiful movie, one that has moments that make me laugh incredibly hard, while also reducing me to tears every time I watch it. And then there's Steve Martin and John Candy. We'll get more into them later, but their performances are great. Not great comedy performances, just great performances. The thing about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is that each component is astonishing on its own, but combined they create something transcendent. I have so much more to say, but I want to hear what my co-hosts think. What's your history with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? What's your history with John Hughes? And does macaroni and cheese belong at Thanksgiving?
Yes.
And no. Not only no, but hell no.
Whoa.
Oh my God. Okay. No, we're not talking about the movie. We're going to spend the rest of the podcast
Mac and
debating
cheese.
the
Macaroni
value
and
of mac
cheese.
and cheese.
Mm.
So, shit, who's going first?
Well, Steph's going first because ladies first.
Jack, you always use your chivalry as
I will
crutch.
die on that fucking chivalry hill.
I like that you're-
every day of my life.
You're calling it chivalry, but it's really
hill.
just a dodge. It's like almost the opposite of chivalry.
Which
Yeah,
is probably where it initially came from, was just like a guy who was indecisive, and he was like,
Ladies first.
hey, woman, you decide, and then boom, it was, hey, chivalry.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly, that was perfect again. And you pretty much said everything I want to say. I did write a little intro about kind of my thoughts on this film. So I'll just share my overall impressions and then let Jack share his. And I think we should get into the whole like John Hughes and where this falls in the pantheon and all that stuff. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Great.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that what I often find is that a lot of older comedies do not quite hold up very well over time.
Mm-hmm.
I will often watch something that holds a great deal of nostalgic value, only to find that it's not nearly as brilliant as I remembered. And I may still love it purely because it holds such a special place in my heart, but I can also recognize that it doesn't hold up to critical scrutiny. However, I had the chance to rewatch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles for this podcast, and it has been a while. and I was reminded just how timeless this classic really is. This is a damn good comedy, first and foremost, featuring two comedic geniuses at the height of their power, both of whom absolutely nail physical comedy. Most of the laughs come from the incomparable John Candy, with Steve Martin playing the cynical straight man to Candy's endearingly chaotic goofball. But we also get to experience the undeniable brilliance of Martin. He can make a straight man utterly hilarious. His fed-up, freak-out moments in this film are comedy gold, wildly entertaining, and so damn relatable, especially during this time of year when so many of us are strung out, stressed out, and hanging by a thread. As funny as this film is, the stellar execution of unexpected emotion and pathos in a buddy road trip comedy is what really makes this gem stand the test of time. The premise of having two men desperate to get home to their families for Thanksgiving sets up the emotional stakes early on. Candy is a comedic MVP, but he also serves as the soul of this film, bringing a lovable sincerity and earnestness to his role. He's endlessly relatable as a well-intentioned, pure soul who just can't help screwing up everything he touches, no matter how hard he tries. The film's greatest strength is the chemistry between Candy and Martin and the unexpected bond that develops between this odd couple. The film's ending packs such a well-earned, non-pandering punch and emphasizes the importance of empathy without sacrificing a second of hilarity to drive that message home. What an absolute treat this film is. A comedy classic with a heaping helping of feel-good charm. No notes? You're damn right. Jack, over to you.
I love that, like, I get to follow this where there's notes about no notes because you've taken copious notes to write out your thing. And I'm like, I didn't write anything down, so I'm just going to riff off the top of my head.
You're so good off the cuff, though. I'm not. I'm
sure.
a rambling idiot off the cuff. I have to write shit down.
Whatever. No, it's and it's one of these things where, looking back at my childhood when growing up, when all of John Hughes's like really big, popular money-making movies that are considered gems were being released. I mean, this was at the height of his powers. I mean, he was the guy. He was like one of the American treasure filmmakers of the time. And so I look at his filmography and I'm like, I've seen basically every single one of his movies. I mean, I think one I didn't see was Class Reunion back from '82. Everything else I've seen, and it's growing up where those movies kind of spoke to you on a certain level, especially when you're young, preteen or teen, and you're watching 16 Candles, you're watching Breakfast Club, you're watching Ferris Bueller's, and you're kind of, they're a little extreme, they're a little obviously embellished, but that's the point. But you can still relate to the characters, because even though he may embellish some of the circumstances, especially with like Weird Science, where it's completely ridiculous, but at the core of it, there's still humanity. And I think that's one of his great strengths as a filmmaker, is that he can make any situation feel relatable in some way. And so even with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, where everything's amped up to 11, it's all relatable. And I look at it now, watching it as an adult with a family versus watching it when it came out, where I was 11, and I love that movie back in the day. And I was laughing at things that I didn't necessarily understand, like the real significance of it. It just looked funny on screen. But going back to it as an adult and seeing it with kids of my own and how I would do anything to get back to them for a holiday, whether it was Thanksgiving or whatever, is so eminently relatable. And, just the comic foibles that happen out of this misguided attempt at humanity. I love it. And it's really testament to these two characters, where they're not really playing characters. They're basically Steve Martin and John Candy hanging out, making a movie where they have different names. I mean, they're basically playing themselves. And in a lot of movies, I wouldn't like that necessarily, but in a movie like this, in a setting like this, it absolutely works. They nail, like you said, the comedic timing is fantastic. They riff off of each other so well. You can identify characteristics of each character. Like, I mean, you can identify John Candy and his goofball, his sincere earnestness that he's just trying to do the right thing, and he's been taken advantage of and put down his whole life. And I mean, Steve Martin, I don't have the job kind of like that, but I can relate to the job that he has, and just the desperation that quiet desperation that just bubbles over and eventually explodes. And he's cursing at the poor, the rental car girl. That's the same gal that was in. I think she was the receptionist in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and she's fucking priceless when she comes back to him, where she's like, "You're fucked," and it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. And to your point, a lot of those movies from our childhood don't hold up well. Either the humor hasn't aged well, there's problematic elements, they weren't that good to begin with, and we just kind of view them through rose-colored glasses. But this one, out of all of his repertoire, I think is one of the ones that holds up the best. And I was so glad that we got to watch it again, and I got to experience it again as an adult versus throughout my young adult and my teen years. So no notes.
I think you stumbled on something that I really felt this time around. And I watch this movie every year. It's an annual watch for me. But I was watching it through a slightly more critical eye this time because I wanted to be sure it truly held up to the No Notes name. And something I caught this time was that I think a lot of people, when they're a little bit younger, they watch it and their focus is really on candy. For me, though, watching it this time, I was like, oh, Steve Martin is a petite, anxiety-ridden neurotic who doesn't want to talk to people on public transit. He's me. I am him.
Right.
Yeah.
And this
totally
speaks so much to my soul. Like whenever I'm on a bus or a train or whatever, I'm instantly putting headphones on. I'm pulling out a book because I'm just not somebody who enjoys talking to strangers as a rule. And a lot of times because I'm a little bit smaller, people like to sit next to me because there's just plenty of room. And then they think I'm friendly, but I'm really, really not. So I absolutely identified with just that. Yeah,
you're a monster. You're an absolute troll. I swear.
But I so identify with that vaguely neurotic, extremely anxious, please just let me ride in peace. I don't want to be mean. I just kind of want to be able to be in my own head for this so much. And the complicated nature of trying to be friendly, because I think one of the things the movie does really well is that it doesn't make Steve Martin a dick at any point. A lot of movies would make it that he has to have an arc where he undergoes, a complete reformation, where he starts out really cold and mean, and then he gradually becomes kinder. And he's not. He's a pretty decent guy from the beginning. He's just not as warm and effusive as Candy is.
And they do this great job because at first, John Candy's pretty grating. You imagine if you were in Steve Martin's position, you'd be like, Jesus, I can't deal with this. And especially because he's just it's one disaster after another, and he loves to talk, and he just is always on. And you can feel Steve Martin's just overall exhaustion. He's like, please, I just need some peace, And then there's this point where I feel like you as the audience are Steve Martin up to a point. And then he gives that, big speech in the hotel room where he's like, and it's this beautiful speech that just is heart-wrenching, where that's the moment where Steve Martin is suddenly seeing him through different eyes. We as the audience are seeing him through different eyes. And it really does, this is a film that teaches you empathy, and it teaches you to not be so judgmental and not be so quick to judge. And but it does it in such a way that it's subtle, so it doesn't feel like it's hitting you over the head, and you don't feel oh, here we go with the preachiness. It just is just beautifully, flawlessly executed, again, without sacrificing an ounce of comedy.
And the acting in that sequence.
I think the biggest triumph of this movie is that if this movie were made today, and there are talks of remakes with Will Smith and other people, and I'm please, for the love of God, fuck no, just leave this one alone. Please leave this one alone. Because if you make it today, then you wouldn't be able to, with John Candy's character and that final revelation that only happens really within the last 5 minutes of the movie as to what Dell's situation really is. A modern movie would spend a half an hour going over that and just beating it to death and slapping you in the face with all of this shit that you don't need, where this movie is just hey, it's not what you thought. He's not who you thought. He doesn't have the life that he was talking about, and here's what's going to happen. And they wraps it up perfectly. It doesn't. There's hardly anything said. He just says, hey, this is my friend. That's it. And that's there's nothing else. There's no other explanation of oh, he doesn't have this. It's just, this is my friend. And everybody's like, hey, welcome. And it's done. And that's the perfect ending. And that is, I wish movies were a little more succinct in that regard with the message that you don't have to spend a quarter of the movie's runtime to hit home with something that's very human and very real. You can just put it out there, but the audience will most of us will pick it up pretty easily.
I agree with you, Jack. And I want to, if I can, really quickly address two things. One that Steph said and one that you said. To go back to that hotel room sequence really quickly. I mentioned in my little intro that I think that Candy and Steve Martin both give great acting performances. Like, to me, like actually like award-worthy performances. And I think that scene is a perfect example of both of them doing that. Because I feel like Steve Martin, while he's giving that diatribe, you can watch him realizing that he's going too far and that he's like going further than he wants to even. He's just on such a roll. And I think he plays it so well that like things that feel like they were written as laugh lines, the way he delivers them just kind of cut deep and you can see him regretting them while he's saying them. And I feel like also John Candy does a really great job of just kind of incrementally internalizing it, like taking it in bit by bit. And the way his face falls slowly, I just think it's really perfectly played. It's so subtle, which is an odd thing to say about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, a movie that managed to get an R rating by having Steve Martin say fuck something like 20 times in like a minute and a half. But I really think both of them just act the shit out of that scene. It's really beautiful.
It is indicative of just how good of an actor that John Candy really was, that people kind of didn't give him credit for. Is that, like some of these other comedic actors, they have that same problem where they get typecast in this, they're the goofball, cornball role. And it's like, yeah, but you forget that underneath that is an actor who can genuinely emote. And this movie, I think more than any of the others that I can recall seeing John Candy in, really lets him emote in very subtle ways. And it's very powerful coming from an actor who you're like, okay, he's just going to make us laugh. And it's like, no, he's actually like, you can, like you said, you can see his face fall. You can see the depression and the hurt creeping in around the edges of his eyes. And that to me is such an amazing performance from something that you would expect from somebody who you would expect could not do that or does not do that. It's like, oh no, he is still an actor. He was still very good actor.
Yeah. It's kind of like the first time you see Will Ferrell in Stranger Than Fiction and you're like, oh, you could do that the entire time. That's incredible. Right. The other thing I wanted to say though, Jack, when you were saying about how there's not like a lot of speechifying at the end, and there's really, I think actually the speech in the hotel room is the closest it comes to having sort of like a big come to Jesus moment. But it does this little visual thing that I love repeatedly of having Neil pick up the other end of Del's steamer trunk and having that just kind of be representative of like, okay, I'm in this with you. Like not having them need to say that they're sorry or I think that in place of having the expository or the on the nose conversation, they just have him pick up the other end of the steamer trunk. And it kind of made me cry almost every time he did it because there's like, it's such a simple but lovely gesture that he's helping him carry this thing.
Yeah. Show, don't tell, like in the purest form of cinema. Yep.
And for somebody who seems like they maybe don't articulate their feelings that much, like Steve Martin's character, like having him just take that other end of it feels like it's his way of expressing it without having to say anything.
Definitely.
I have an potentially interesting add-on to that. So there is this really great video on YouTube that you guys may have seen or may have heard about, but it's called The Lost Version of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And basically, and this is what I found really interesting because you guys are really talking about the fact that they don't need to explain a lot and that a lot of stuff is just, we just get it with very subtle cues because it's so well done. But originally this film, from the original script and the original filming of this was 3.5 hours long. And John Hughes went with his editor and they cut it down to a 2-hour cut. And then the studio was like, that's still too long. We need it closer to an hour and a half. And so there is actually more deleted footage in this film than what actually appears on the screen. And some of the footage they used in the theatrical trailer, if you go back and watch that, there's scenes that don't appear in the film and it's from this edited version. But most of the film has never been seen in its in any form, and it's now considered lost. But there are like entire characters and subplots that are cut out from the film. There's entire scenes, like there's a scene after, we get the Candy reveal about kind of what's really going on with him, where the two of them go to a diner and they have this really like heartfelt conversation. And you can read the original script of this scene online. But it's interesting because it's one of these films like where like I would watch the hell out of a 3.5 hour cut of this, and it's probably all fucking brilliant, and it would be a different movie for sure. But it's interesting how you can cut that much out of a film and it still work this well.
Yeah, for sure.
And in this video, they go through and they show you kind of like there's remnants of some of the stuff that's cut. And they show you like, oh, here's like where a big scene was. And here's explaining this scene. And here's the backstory and stuff. And it's like when you watch that, you're like, that's really interesting and probably would have been really compelling. But also, we don't need it. You know, like this is a perfect film at half the length of what it was intended to be. And I think that's like, I don't know, that's pretty miraculous.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I was reading that about there's a subplot with
his wife, right?
Part of the subplot was with his wife, and where she's thinking that he's cheating on him. And so,
yeah,
you know, and there's elements of that still in the movie where she's laying in bed and she's crying, and it's, you know, you think, oh, she's missing him. No, that's the remnant of the fact where she thinks that he's out having an affair, you know, and I'm with you. Like this is perfect as is, but there's also a part of me that wants to see that lost cut because you're right. I think there's so much more in it that would be brilliant. And I would be totally fine watching each of those movies as their own separate entity. Like this is the one I love. And this is the, you know, the director's cut that I also love for completely different reasons. You know, I understand why they did it. I totally get it. And you know, as a comedy with all those other elements in it, probably wouldn't have worked as well as a comedy because now you're adding a lot more dramatic heft to it. But I still think that a lot of that stuff I would still be down to watch. And I love that there's still little trace elements of it in the movie if you look.
I would watch it.
It's weird how...
I'm sorry.
Oh, God, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's weird how we consider this a no notes, you know, i.e. a perfect film as is. We're like, this film is perfect. And yet if you like came and said, okay, we have restored this footage and now because there's basically at this point 2 director's cuts of this film that we've never seen. Now we have that and you can watch it. We'd probably watch the hell out of that and be like, okay, and now also this version is a perfect version as well. It's like they would both exist separately, like you said, Jack, but they would both be fucking perfect. And that's
Absolutely.
I don't know, that kind of blows my mind. Go ahead, Kelly. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. All I was going to say is that I actually would probably watch that one as more of a curiosity than I think I would ever be able to muster the love I have for this, because I feel like this movie is so focused. It has such a clear thesis statement and it has such a heart to it that I think that allowing it to sprawl for 3 hours and to put in this suspicion subplot kind of cuts through the purity a little bit of it, you're supposed, or at least to me, I felt like at the end, you're supposed to have this very like heartbreaking moment that's also really beautiful of seeing that Steve Martin and his wife have this very good relationship, this really lovely marriage, and that for Del, seeing them, you know, seeing this happy marriage is also undercutting what he'll never have again. And I think that as a viewer, it's kind of, it would maybe lose a little bit of that if you went into sort of like an almost, I don't know, screwball suspicion storyline. And I just don't frankly think it's necessary, especially because, and I don't mean any shade towards the actress who plays his wife, she's very good. It's really not her story. And I think that it's extremely focused how it is right now. I hate to sound so incredibly crotchety, but I think more movies would benefit from maybe cutting a little bit of the fat and maybe not being quite as self-indulgent and just being, you know, a tight, close movie that just really has like this one really, really, really simple concept at its core. And that is we're trying to get home.
I mean, they say like of all the elements that make a good film, the one like unsung element that people take for granted that probably has the biggest impact on the success of the film is editing. And I think it's so fucking hard because I've heard, and I haven't read it, but I've heard that the script is amazing for the, you know, the original script. And I bet you they acted the hell out of it. And I bet you it's like really great. And I'm sure it was really hard to cut some of that stuff where you watch it and you're like, this is brilliant to watch, but it doesn't serve the film. It doesn't keep the momentum going. It like slows it down. We lose the great pacing. It's fucking, you know, it's like that phrase, kill your darlings, which they talk about the editing process. It's like, you've got to lose the shit you love. And that's really fucking hard. But I agree with you 9 out of 10 times when you trim it, you make it better, even if you're losing really good stuff.
Yeah, I'm not usually a big fan of studio notes, but I think on this one, they kind of nailed it. I think it benefits from being... a little bit briefer. So let's talk about John Hughes, guys. What's your history with him? Anybody?
Well, I've seen all his movies, basically. I mean,
Yeah,
all
me
of them. Which did not know. So one of the things that surprised me, and I probably knew this at one point and lost over the years, that was that he was not the director of Pretty in Pink. He was only the writer and executive producer. And somehow, some way, for some reason, I really thought that he was also the director of that movie. But, looking back at this repertoire of all of these films, and it's like, holy shit. I mean, this was basically like a flip book, a scrapbook of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
All of these movies at at various times, and not all of them necessarily resonated. Like She's Having a Baby. Yeah, I
think that's definitely a C tier Hughes.
Yeah. Is it a bad movie? No. Is it a good John Hughes movie? Also, no. He could do so much better. But I also remember growing up with Mr. Mom,
which is
and how that movie resonated so much with me because I grew up with a single mother who was out in the male-dominated, if you will, workforce, kicking ass and taking names. And so in that regard, I related to how she's kind of getting called back into the workforce. And I couldn't relate to the Michael Keaton. We didn't have a Michael Keaton stand in my house, but that movie resonated with me on an emotional level. And it was just funny as shit. Mm-hmm. So and then of course you've got Vacation and Christmas Vacation and, Breakfast Club and all that stuff. I mean, clearly it's all fantastic, but what I love, and I think a lot of people, it's an unsung classic, or maybe it's just me and I'm just weird, is that I absolutely love, Some Kind of Wonderful. Now, he didn't direct that. He did only just write it. But that movie to me really kind of cut through.
Well, that's the Pretty in Pink correction, right? Like she was supposed to end up with Ducky, but she didn't. So then he did Some Kind of Wonderful to be like, this is how it was supposed to go.
Yep, exactly. And I wasn't in high school yet, but I was approaching, if you will, and it really kind of, I don't know, it to me, that story, even though it has some kind of funny elements and some stuff that's like, oh, it's kind of corny, but it really spoke to me as a young adult and as a young man my mom was pushing college, even at a young age, and I was kind of like really resisting. I hated school and I wanted to be done with school. Even at that age, I was done, and so I can relate to Eric Stoltz's character and, yes, the popular girl, and you're supposed to be going after her by society standards. But, to me, Watts was always the more compelling character from the moment the movie starts. And so, I don't know, to me, it spoke to me on a level. And but then, of course, you've also got like The Great Outdoors and Uncle Buck, and, where Candy is, again, being Candy. And they're just, those are more screwball comedies that were always just a good time. And anytime they were on TV, you sat down and watched them because they were just so goddamn good.
I think he's just so good at, I'm the same way. I'm very familiar. I feel like I've watched just about everything, and he wrote a lot more than he directed, and his writing is so great. But he's just so good at like creating these relatable characters that you care about in the midst of, comedic chaos and goofiness and silliness and all those things, and being able to strike that balance. And I'm like thinking through all the films, and I feel like every single one to a T has some sort of like emotional gravitas to it, or some potency that extends beyond the like, oh, this is really funny, or this is like really sweet or charming or whatever. It's like there's always something there that kind of really hits you hard and really speaks to you, no matter how old you are. Like whether you're watching this as a young person relating to other young people, or as a grown-ass adult going back and watching it, it still has the power to speak to you on a really deep level. And I think that's really remarkable.
Yeah, I think you're right, Steph. I'm going to say something potentially controversial. I don't care for his teen flicks. I was born 40 years old. And I've always identified a little bit more with like the kind of more adult Hughes movies. I liked Christmas Vacation. I love Christmas Vacation.
I love Christmas Vacation.
Yep. Love Mr. Mom. Love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And you could argue that they're about the most middle-aged movies you can possibly watch. But I think like to connect with what you said, Steph, and to kind of tie into something you said, Jack, about things that seem like they should be corny, I think Hughes has a real gift for being just earnest. And so it doesn't come across as cheesy or corny because it doesn't feel like he's manipulating you, because it feels like he's just being really sincere. And he'll undercut it with something like really funny. like in Christmas Vacation when he's watching the reels up in the attic, and it's really like sweet and charming, and he's watching these old Christmas reels, and then she pulls the attic door down and he falls through, and it's very funny because he's wearing the turban and everything, and it's, goofy as hell. But I think he does a really great balancing act of none of the humor is at the expense of the genuine emotion. You don't lose any of that sincerity and that heart. That's why Steve Martin's character can be likable and charming in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and why John Candy can be kind of grating, but also incredibly sweet and winning. And you don't have to make him an unlikable, horrible character. You can just have it that he's reading a book called, I think it's like The Canadian Mounted Police or something like that. Did you guys catch the sort of pornographic book he's reading? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, things you only catch when you're an adult. You don't even notice that. Well, especially because back then our TVs were 14 inches big. So there's no way to actually see any of that shit, or now it's like an 80-inch TV.
Yeah, you don't notice the busty Canadian on the paperback.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you talked about Christmas Vacation, and I thought of that when I rewatched this film. I was like, my God, can this man write a good freak out scene? Like a man on the verge of losing his sanity because he's pushed to the brink and he's just overly stressed and, exhausted and overwhelmed. And just like there's so much comedic brilliance in, the Chevy Chase freak out scene and the Steve Martin freak out scene that is funny as hell, but also like, you fucking get it. You're like, I've been there.
So
I feel this.
Oh my God.
I'm feeling this on a really deep level. And, they're just iconic. And I love both of them. As a
middle-aged man, it's like I wholeheartedly can relate to all of that, where you're trying not to, you're freaking out and spazzing out a little bit with body humor, but you're kind of trying to restrain yourself too. So it's all just coming out verbally. And been there, done that.
I feel like there are 3 really great, neurotic skinny guy freakouts from that era, and they are Steve Martin in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation, and Tom Hanks at the end of The Burbs.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Just the best to me, neurotic button down yuppie loses their shit moments.
Fantastic.
So on a visual level, something I really liked was the sort of subtle way that they contrasted Del and Neil through costumes, because the entire time Neil's dressed pretty nicely. His suit looks maybe a little bit too big, but that might have just been the style at the time, honestly. But Del's wearing these very school teachery cardigans and bow ties that just kind of suggest he's a little bit warmer and a little bit more avuncular, maybe. And then to show him doing what he does really well, I always kind of like it when the goofy guy ends up being really good at his job. It's a stupid little thing, but I'm not the biggest fan of The Office, but every time that Steve Carell's character shows that he's a good salesman, I'm like, oh, right, okay, that makes sense. He's supposed to be in a position, so he should be. So I liked when he does the thing where he's selling the shower rings to get them some money.
It's a really charming scene.
It really is.
Even though he's totally swindling them, you can't help it just feels so oh, it's okay. It's all right. He's just trying to get home. So it's okay. You do what you got to do, John Candy. You swindle the money out of those teenage girls,
So, okay, I've got a question for you guys. We sometimes on Guilty Pleasures have done what's your favorite kill? What was your best laugh in this? I'm happy to go first if you want. For me, it is always the sequence where the car is spinning around really quickly and he's looking over at him, and periodically Del just turns into the devil. And for some reason, him in that Party City devil costume makes me laugh so hard. Yes. And I have this very dumb soft spot for movies that involve a car that is fucking obliterated, still driving. So in the Blues Brothers, by the end of that movie, their car is fucked beyond repair, but they're still driving it. And the same thing just works really well for me in this movie. The totally, absolutely shit-canned car that they are still driving and just singing happily and loudly to. Both of those things made me laugh really hard.
I'll tell you my scene. I mean, this is very cliche, but I love a good cussing out scene, and the scene where he is swearing at the airline clerk, and says the F word about 75 times. And then like when she just has that brilliant comeback, like you mentioned, Jack, where she's like, "You're fucked," with such like
the build up to that
sinister glee. Oh, it's so good. It's such a fun exchange. And I laughed out loud. I was like, this is, because again, like I can relate to how like he's so fucking dead at this point, and he has every right to be that pissed off and that like upset, and she just couldn't give a shit less. And oh, it's so good.
Jack?
For me, it's going to be one of those, again, where you won't see it in modern cinema, where Dell tosses the cigarette out of the car and it goes back in through the back window and it lands on the seat. And that's literally all you see up until the point where they're sitting on his trunk and you hear this whoosh, you know, and then I'm just fucking dying laughing because, again, in 80s comedies, or maybe more just John Hughes, or maybe just this movie, it never pans back to the cigarette. You never see it smoking. You never see like flames starting to grow. Where in any other movie, and especially in modern times, where like I think directors would be like, "Oh, we have to pan back to this because, you know, we only showed it 3 minutes ago, and so people have already forgotten that it happened," which is bullshit. Where this movie just trusts you enough to know that, oh yeah, by the way, 3 minutes ago that landed on a vinyl seat in the back, and it's going to ignite at some point. And the way that it ignites, where you don't even see it ignite, you just hear it, and then they turn around, you know, and it's, oh my god, that to me, that kind of physical comedy, you can't. Most actors can't nail that, and they just fucking nail it perfectly.
I love the way that they each kind of like look back and it's on fire, and then they're very calm and they turn and they look forward again. Then the other one turns and looks forward, and then they both kind of turn and look back. And then it's just such a like, because they've just been through so much at this point. They're like, well, of course the car's on fire.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Of course it is, you know.
Why wouldn't it be on fire? You know.
But also the part where Steve Martin like grabs John Candy, is sort of shaking him around.
Oh yeah,
that's so hard because it's. I feel like it kind of set the template for what Chris Farley and David Spade would do really well later. You know, like,
yes, that's almost
very funny to watch a smaller guy kind of go totally apeshit on a bigger guy, and the bigger guy to just be like, "Oh no, what's happening?"
I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they pulled inspiration right from that scene. Yeah, but you're right. It is very Chris Farley. Yeah, it's very reminiscent of that.
I think they do some very, very inspired visual comedy in the movie. And there are two things that are really different that come to mind, but both of them made me laugh pretty hard. And one is when he gets to the motel room and he tries to pull out his credit cards and they're just scorched and melted and blackened.
He's like, I've got a Visa, I've got a Diners Club, I've got a gas card.
Yeah, I mean, they don't linger too long on it, but like, it's really funny when it happens. And the other thing that makes me laugh, and it's real, like it's the exact opposite because it's so big and so stupid, but it makes me laugh every time, is John Candy's in the car kind of dance scene to the mess around where he's like playing the air trumpet and he's just like dancing his ass off and having a great time. And it makes me laugh so hard because it seems so truly joyous. Like he was probably having fun filming it. And yeah, I just love it.
It's funny that you said that because I have that in my notes and I wrote down that this is probably one of the most joyous scenes of all time. Like if you aren't smiling ear to ear when you see that, then I just like, you're dead inside. There's something really wrong with you.
Back in the day, or my TV was too small or something, but I'd never noticed that after the car stops and they're done freaking out and John Candy's not the devil anymore, that Steve Martin's fingers are embedded in the vinyl of the dashboard. And he's like pulling them out like that. Oh my God, how did I not see this before? Like, it was just pure comedy.
That's such a great turn of phrase where you're like, and John Candy's not the devil anymore. It's just like so casually dropped.
It should be how we measure all time. My mom watched it with me, and she's usually kind of a little bit more sophisticated in her humor than I am. But her biggest laugh every time we've watched this movie together is when they fall asleep together, and in the morning, Del says that he's got his hand between two pillows, and Steve Martin says, "Those aren't pillows." And I was so relieved because there was a small part of me that was worried that that scene was going to be played as like a kind of gay panic thing. But instead, it's kind of more of just like, if you were in bed with some rando who you just met.
It's just icky for being icky.
Like, it's just the whole idea of like, if you're in that position, like it has nothing to do with the sexuality of anybody. It's just uncomfortable and awkward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the one scene that you're right, because that was the one scene that I recall, obviously laughing my ass off as a kid, and then looking back wondering that same thing, is that scene played a certain way? And it was so like such a revelation and a relief that it was not.
Yeah. And even when they start kind of like talking about like sports or whatever, it feels more like it's laughing at them, like for being kind of ridiculous in that respect, I thought.
I think as much as I love John Hughes, and I really do, this feels like one of the few films, and I'm not really placing any blame because most of his films are of the time, but one of the few films that you watch back and there's really nothing that jumps out as being specific, especially problematic.
Agreed.
Whereas I think every other film that I watch, I love them, but there's always a moment of cringe where I'm like, oof, yikes, this didn't age well. And this film does age well.
Yeah, for me, it's.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jack. I was just going to say.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Every time I watch Christmas Vacation, which is another annual watch for me, the whole like very strange subplot of Chevy Chase fantasizing about that shop girl always feels weird because it doesn't feel like it's true to his character. And also he's supposed to be married to Beverly D'Angelo, who is like so far out of his league.
Yeah. Right.
So like, why is he fantasizing about, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but it just feels like he's like, they say you're the last family man. And then he's got this wife who's a total dime and he's thinking about this shop girl. It just felt really inauthentic to the character to me. But yeah, it's
also, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. All I was going to say is I absolutely agree with you, Steph. I don't think there are moments really, and I watched them because I was ready to be like, this was my pick. And, if there's anything that's like gross in it, I want to be prepared to hold myself accountable. But I did not have a moment where I was like, eesh, I wish they weren't saying that word, or, I wish they weren't approaching it that way. Like, I felt like it has a certain timeless quality that I really appreciated.
And that's
it's interesting to me that this movie, out of all of his repertoire, is one of the movies that, not to be like denigrate the movie, but it almost doesn't feel like it's not a traditional John Hughes movie. I mean, that is a given, because everybody, when most people think of John Hughes, they think of teen angst and they think of that kind of, although he, like you said, he's done some very good middle-aged comedies, especially with Mr. Mom and the vacation movies. But when people think John Hughes, they think Pretty in Pink, they think Breakfast Club, they think 16 Candles, and so it's interesting where, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, out of all the other movies that I'm looking at that he's done in that era, really, I'm not going to say he doesn't feel like a John Hughes movie, but it's a non-traditional John Hughes movie. And I just think that really showed that he was okay with stepping out of his comfort zone in the director chair to say, you know what, I can tell other stories. It doesn't have to be teens being wacko. I can totally like go back to this middle-aged men just, misbehaving and having problems. And I love the fact that he can, at a lot of those directors from that time, he can take really Steve Martin's character is the everyman. We're supposed to, kind of root for him. We got it. He's a family man. He's working the 9 to 5. He just wants to get home. But you can put these, ordinary characters in these really extraordinary situations and watch the comedic gold that comes out of it. But I think it was really impressive to say, yeah, this is also a John Hughes film. He doesn't just have to do this stereotypical expectation. He can go and totally do a straight comedy. It's just a couple of guys being goofballs, and it's great.
Yeah, I think to your point, Jack. I'm so sorry, Steph. Go ahead.
No, you go first. I'll go after you.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All I was going to say is, I think to your point, Jack, like Steve Martin is the everyman, but like so is John Candy in a way, and that's not something you see that often, where they let both of the characters. I mean, John Candy's bigger for sure, but like he's also just a guy who loved his wife and who was on the road too much, and there's this sort of idea that like they're almost different kinds of sides of the same coin. And I think that I again don't like to be this person that much, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think in a modern version, like he'd have to be bigger and more annoying, and more cartoony, and
he'd be Chris Farley.
Yeah, or as much as I like him in some roles, Will Ferrell. He'd be a cartoon. And I don't think Del is a cartoon. I think that he's actually really sympathetic. And I think he is an everyman who's just a different version of the everyman than Steve Martin is. And I think I saw it and identified with Steve Martin, but I bet there are plenty of people who saw it and absolutely identified with John Candy and thought like, oh, that's me. I would want to have conversations with people and I would want to chat and be friendly. And sometimes people are kind of cold to me and that makes me sad. I think it's a rare thing where you find a movie where both of them get to be sympathetic and both of them get to be the everyman, and neither of them has to be a caricature or villainous.
You know, when we talked about the film, you know, a ton of stuff was cut out of the film, and I mentioned that there was this diner scene right before the very end of the film. Mm-hmm. And in the script, it's very well written. And again, we don't need it, but it's really well done. And in that scene, John Candy really goes into kind of like, I think there's a lot of heart in it. He's talking about how hard the holidays are and how lonely he gets, and how he finds this is the time of the year where he wants to like latch onto somebody, and he comes on a little too strong because he's so desperate for a connection. And he's like, that's why he was the way he was with Steve Martin's character. And I think that, you know, even though we didn't get to see it, I think that reading that and see, because on the video I watched, they sort of played that out. That really, I think, speaks to a lot of us, because the holidays, they're beautiful and they're magical and they're, you know, lovely and all those things, but they can also be incredibly painful and incredibly hard, especially if you've experienced loss. And I think that level of pathos, like, really, again, adds a depth to John Candy's character that I think we get anyway, but just really helps to reinforce that he is just this like guy who's just desperate to be loved and desperate to like have a family and have connections. And I think that's really relatable too. Even if we are, I'm an introvert too, and I'd be the person that's like, please don't talk to me like stranger on the bus or plane. But also like real connections are really important and meaningful. And so to your point, Kelly, I think they are both like they're two sides of the same coin. And I think that they both are written to be very relatable and not to be caricatures, and to have, you know, something that speaks to all of us. So I think that's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, I think I'm sure it's an amazing speech and that it was really well written and that John Candy delivered it really well. I think it's more meaningful to not have it spelled out like that, because I feel like there were two major gut punch moments in the movie. I cried a bunch of times, but there were two major gut punch moments. And the first is when Steve Martin goes to the train station and Del's just sitting there. Yeah. And it doesn't really need all of that language, you know, like you just have the visual of it, and it's enough to kind of tell you, like, he's sitting in a train station alone on Thanksgiving, and it's the saddest thing you can think of. And with two very intelligent, thoughtful performers, Steve Martin is a generous enough scene partner to kind of fall back a little bit and really just kind of let John Candy carry the emotion of that. And the other part that is played both as a happy moment and as a sad moment is when, at the very end, when they've reached the house and Steve Martin goes to give his wife like a kiss. John Candy, once again, acting his ass off, looks both like, I'm happy to be here, but also just like so sad. Like that this isn't his world really. Like he's the outsider in this, even though he's grateful to be there. And I think both of those things hit a little bit harder for not having the explanatory speech of like, you know, having him go into it, like, because you get that. You absolutely get like, This is a lonely person, and he's especially lonely right now. And he has said things like, you know, here's to the wives and things like that, that tell you like, this is just somebody who's so lonely and so desperate for any kind of connection and warmth. And you see that in his actions. And Jack, you mentioned showing and not telling. And I think that's something that this movie does extraordinarily well. And while I think I almost like the idea of reading the screenplay more than I like the idea of seeing it committed to screen. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
No, I 100% think you're right. And I think that we all agree that cutting this down and making it as lean as possible is the right choice. And it doesn't lose an ounce of that gravitas by doing that. And you don't need it. I just love I think I just wanted to speak to, I love kind of how Candy's character is written, because he isn't this like, I mean, he's obviously funny and silly and he does stupid things, but he isn't this like bananas caricature that you can't relate to, that you're like, oh, what a goofball. You're like, he's got some real depth and pathos that is very relatable. Even if you're not that, even if you don't like sort of, even if you relate more to Steve Martin and you're not in line with his kind of personality type, you still really feel everything he's feeling, and it hits so hard. And I was just going to say, when you're talking about the wives, like the scene that like always chokes me up is when they're in the hotel and he's like, Steve Martin says, do you love your wife? And he's like, love doesn't even begin to cover it. It doesn't. And it's just like, so, and I think like most of us like kind of know what's coming before it even comes, but like, there's like such quiet moments like that packs such an incredible punch.
Yeah. And it never feels like, oh, I'm sorry. So sorry, Jack. Do you want to go ahead?
No, go for it.
Are you sure? Okay.
I'm gonna make a whole like mixtape of just us going, no, you, no, I'm sorry, you, no, please.
We could do like 5 hours of just that over all the things we've recorded so far.
Make like a techno trance song of just like,
No, you go. No, you go. No.
I was talking to my mom about it afterwards, and we were saying like, you know, with a lot of like, there are 8 million like fucking Hallmark Christmas movies, Lifetime Christmas movies that feel like they throw in this like last minute, like, oh, his dad died in the war, or, you know, like some dumb bullshit at the end that feels like it's designed to make you cry. This movie, it feels very obvious to me that John Hughes knew from the beginning that Dell's wife was dead. And the entire time he was writing to that. The clues are there throughout the movie. It doesn't feel like an afterthought. It doesn't feel like something that's put in there to make you cry. It feels like it's something that is part and parcel of the narrative, that is an essential aspect of his character. And that is just part of the story. And it happens to be a really painful, tragic part of the story, but it's not thrown in there as a sort of emotional manipulation. It's put there because it's who Dell is.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really rare to have a film that packs that much of an emotional punch at the end without it feeling manipulative. Like, it's not Disney. You're not feeling like your strings are being pulled where they're like, now's the time to cry. You're just like, it's so genuine. It's so sincere. And it's so natural. It's like exactly where the film needed to go and where it was going all along. But it's so fucking satisfying. And it just like, it makes you feel all the feels without feeling like you're being pandered to or manipulated. And
Kelly brings this up a lot. And I agree with that, because I think with Disney and with Pixar and all these other movies, there is a science to it. And you can basically almost sit back and watch the movie and see the storyboards where they're like, okay, we're 27 minutes in, so we have to have a musical number, and we're, you know, X number of minutes in, and now we have to have this emotional scene that's going to pull at the heart. Like, there's a science to it. There's obviously a formula that they have to follow. And I love it when you look at these older movies that didn't have that template. They just told a story. And to your point, I mean, yeah, obviously he knew from the start that this is the character, and Candy knew that from the start. This is the character's arc. This is the character's story. And so there are the little tidbits if you're watching and you know what to look for, where the cracks start to show, and you know, where he gets real defensive and he backpedals and he covers himself up, even though he's very loquacious and he's very good at talking, where he oversteps and he has to reel himself back in to keep himself from being too vulnerable.
Right. I haven't been home.
I love those moments, because again, in a modern movie, we'd have to have those beaten over our head every 15 minutes. And this movie doesn't do that. And I love it that they're not following the traditional heartstring, you know, tugging, you know, fucking formula that films feel that they have to follow. And I applaud, you know, these older movies for that they just, again, let's show you, let's not tell you, you know, and the emotional impact is the same and or greater.
I mean, can you guys think of another example, not just in modern times, but like overall, of a movie where the central driving relationship is a platonic friendship between two middle-aged men? Because I think that like it's very rare, especially in a modern movie setting, to have a movie where there's no romantic relationship at all, really.
Right. It's not a common.
Especially like I adored Pig, to refer to our last No Notes, but like it made a little more sense in some ways to have that like kind of almost paternal relationship, but like a middle-aged, simply platonic friendship being the driving force, the foundational relationship in a movie. I can't really think of another one like that.
And you could make the argument that there's like the buddy comedies, but then that's a completely different genre and a completely different trope. So within this kind of like filmmaking and storytelling, I'm with you. There's got to be like a handful, but I can't think of them, where you could definitely swerve into buddy comedy territory, like, you know, 48 Hours, something completely different, you know. But in this, along these lines, no, I can't really think of one off the top of my head.
Like we mentioned Chris Farley and David Spade. Like if you think about like even Tommy Boy or what was the other one, guys? Help me out.
Black Sheep.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen them, but in both of them, wasn't there like also a romantic subplot? Am I crazy?
In one of them there was.
Okay,
I can't remember which one.
I feel like there's no real romantic subplot in this. Like, he's already married. Like,
he's already married.
It's a done deal. It's done and dusted. Like, they're they're a happy couple. Like, it's not a romantic subplot, which is fine with me. We're a happily established couple subplot, if anything. And it's barely even a subplot. It's much more of a, like, supplemental plot, if anything, that makes it so that when she says at the end, it's so nice to meet you, Mr. Griffith, or whatever she says, it hits harder because you get that this is a couple who talks to each other, and that when he was calling home to her, he was telling her what was going on.
Yeah, I was going to say that I really love, and I think it's pretty impressive how, because I think most filmmakers would have been tempted to lean more heavily into Steve Martin's family and show you more scenes of like, oh, his happy family at home, and there'd be more interaction of them. And cutting that down to where they're almost non-existent except for, through Steve Martin's eyes and his perspective, really does center the film entirely on this friendship and this relationship. And in a way that, like, to your point, Kelly, like, you almost never see. And it's pretty remarkable for that.
Yeah. And I think, again, with the whole, like, brevity being sort of the soul of wit and making this as lean as possible, having the little moment, like in the beginning when he calls home and the kids say something like, flight's delayed again, or something like that. It's just enough to tell you that this is something that happens pretty frequently and that his family is kind of used to this, so that you can see the sort of parallel that Del is alluding to of, like, you've got to make sure you get home and you have to make sure you spend time with your family without it being kind of overly preachy or didactic or maudlin. It just kind of puts it out there that this is something that is potentially a problem on some level.
Well, and if you look at Del's character, where he's really, if you pull back all the comedic layers and his bumbling efforts, he really is an altruistic guy. He really is trying to help, and I think it's again, a lot of movies wouldn't really allow that to breathe. There'd have to be some kind of villainous behavior. There'd have to be some kind of narcissist or some kind of, element to this character that's bad. Mm-hmm. Where in this movie, it's like, no, he genuinely is trying to help because he knows what it's like to not have that. Mm-hmm. And he knows what it's like to miss that. And so he really is trying to help, Steve Martin's character get home. And it all goes spectacularly wrong. But he, at the end of the day, he's a genuinely altruistic person.
Yeah.
And that's rare to see in a movie like this, where you have to have one of the characters has to have something wrong with them,
Right. And Steve Martin's never cruel, or at least never intentionally. And I think, like, little moments that in a lesser actor / screenwriter / director situation would have maybe not hit well. They would have maybe just felt a little bit saccharine. When he's talking to the picture of his wife and he says something about, I did it again. I met somebody I liked and I went too hard or something like that. Instead, I found that genuinely tragic, of just like, this is somebody who so desperately wants connection, and he met somebody he liked. And they do so much careful work in the movie to show that he likes him, and that it's not just some sort of, like, misplaced sense of goodness, if that makes any sense. Like,
misplaced nobility.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, down to the idea that, like, when they're in that refrigerated truck, he let Del into the cab in the beginning. So, like, Del could have probably rode in the cab where it was warmer, but instead he chooses to sit in the back with Neil where it's freezing. And, like, it's such a small gesture that's not commented on, but, like, you as a viewer can take away from that. Like, he doesn't want to leave him alone back there. And that's so sweet and so kind.
That's a really good observation.
I've watched this movie a lot.
Yeah. It's very rewatchable.
It holds up.
It does. Do we feel like, Kelly, I mean, this is your no notes. Do you have other things you want to talk about, or do you want to kind of do our final thoughts on this film?
Oh, you should probably stop me, because I could talk about this movie for like way too long.
Well, I'm having a good time. So if you have other things you wanted to talk about, I'm not trying to stop you, because there's a lot to unpack in this.
All right. Well, I'm not going to go on too much longer because I know everybody's got stuff they have to do. But I would like to say that I think that this movie manages an impressive balance between being a very funny, very sincere movie and managing to actually feel like a pretty effective holiday movie. which is clearly one of John Hughes' strengths, because Christmas Vacation is also a really, really effective holiday movie. But Thanksgiving movies don't really exist for the most part. You've got this and the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving as like the two good, sincere ones. And I think it really works. I think it really captures like the kind of manic sense of travel and the way that the holidays are joyous, but also really, really, really stressful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think, did you guys catch brief Kevin Bacon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
20 seconds of Kevin Bacon in the beginning of this
Man
movie.
running to cat.
Oh, so good. So good.
But
I think I screamed out loud. I was like, Kevin. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I kind of said the same thing to my mom. I was like, wait, Kevin Bacon's in this? I've seen this movie 1,000 times and I forgot that Kevin Bacon is in this.
I did not realize
he's
either.
Not a character in this movie at all. He was just there.
I don't even think he has a spoken line. I think he's just there to be like, he's like 3 minutes, and then he's done.
And he's so good at being smarmy even without saying a word.
Just looking like Kevin Bacon.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that little like salute he gives as he gets into the cab is like, what a douche,
Yep. I think anybody who's worked in an office can appreciate the irritation of the meeting that he's in at the beginning of the movie.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's like people are just talking for the sake of talking.
And at the end of the movie where he's still pouring over the fucking the posters, even though he has like it's like after Thanksgiving, he's a half a finished Thanksgiving meal and he's still in the office trying to decide on a fucking poster.
And he doesn't give a fuck like how much he's inconveniencing anyone else. He's not thinking about anybody else. And I am somebody, Jack, you mentioned you can't relate to Steve Martin's job. I am somebody who is in the corporate world and has a job similar to that in marketing. And it's so painful. Like when that's probably why I relate to Steve Martin so much. I'm like watching it going, because right now all I want to do is like be in holiday spirit and celebrate and do things. And my job's like in performance reviews, and budgeting and and I'm like, kill me now. And I don't care about any of it. And I just want to be like, why do you people care about this shit? There's bigger fish to fry right now. And yeah, so it was painful and relatable.
It's funny because I said this wasn't going to connect, but it kind of does. Like, not so much with planes, trains, and automobiles, but with kind of the John Hughes grown-up movie ethos. Like, I think there's some of that in Mr. Mom, and I think there's some of that in Christmas Vacation, that idea of like the cold corporate environment that instead of giving you your bonus gives you the entrance into the Jelly of the Month
Fruit
Club.
of the Month Club.
Yeah. Well, he must have had like some really bad experiences with marketing, because in Mr. Mom, she's in marketing.
Marketing's
in this
the worst.
one, he's in marketing, and I swear in another one of his movies, like one of the parents or the adults is in marketing, and like I know that was also kind of the it job back in the 80s.
Yes,
like,
everybody was a fucking marketer.
But I swear, like, he must have some kind of personal hatred towards that, because it's like it seems like it crops up in his movies a lot.
Yeah,
probably even just making films dealing with like the marketing suits and shit. He's probably like, these assholes, these idiots.
That is probably true. Yeah, it was probably an end result of how do I market this movie? I don't fucking care. Just market the goddamn movie.
Yep.
You know what? This actually reminds me of a point like Jackie brought up. You're like, well, John Hughes, it's weird to see a film like this and see it be so successful because John Hughes is so known for teen angst. But why I think it works so well is because we never really outgrow teen angst. Like even as adults, like it morphs a little bit and it changes, but we're still angsty teenagers, and we still have the same like emotional responses to things, and we still like make mountains out of molehills, and we still like, are stressed out and feeling like worried that we don't fit in or that we're not accepted. Like all the things that, it's like that whole like it gets better thing that you tell teenagers. And like in some ways, I guess it does. But in a lot of ways, it's like, no, we're just kind of always a mess.
Yeah.
And our problems just change into different kinds of problems.
Yeah. And I think that's why like the freakouts work out so well, because I think that both of these movies, and it's been a minute since I've seen Mr. Mom, but I feel like knowing Michael Keaton's oeuvre at the time, there's probably at least one good freakout for him in that like they're kind of dealing with the idea that you get older, but you don't necessarily fully get wiser. And you just kind of learn to suppress a little bit more. So you don't have the reactions in real time. You hide them and then they explode. And my mom and I talked about this a bunch, that like I've worked a bunch of customer service type jobs in various ways. I've had to be the person who gets yelled at a lot. And I obviously hated it, but I also understood that, like, when you're just not having your needs met by a corporation, you're not really yelling at the person you're talking to. You're yelling at the idea of the thing that's fucking you over.
Yeah.
So when he's yelling at the car rental woman, he's a little bit yelling at her conversation with her sister about, Thanksgiving, but mostly he's just yelling at the situation more than anything else. And I think that's something that's like somehow both very adolescent, but also very unique to being at the age where you have to swallow your emotions. You have to suppress.
Yeah.
And then eventually they just become too big and they have to come out somehow.
And we still throw temper tantrums, like even as grown-ass adults, we still have these moments where we're like, and it is precisely because we bottle so much for so long that those temper tantrums are pretty extreme when they happen, because at that point, you've blown your top. You are way past your breaking point. You have nothing left in you. And it's like the slightest offense sets you off. And I say this at work a lot. I'm like, you're not ever really mad at the thing. You're mad at what the thing represents.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Like it's the last straw, and it's like all the culmination of things that led up to this point that is making you sound crazy. And that's why it feels so frustrating. People like gaslight you and like, you're really overreacting about this. And you're like, yeah, I'm overreacting about this little thing, but this freak out I'm having is based on so much more than this little
situation,
thing.
not the person. Yep.
Yeah.
Also, telling somebody that they're overreacting is it's the same as telling me to calm down. Like, it's not gonna it's gonna make things worse. It's 100% gonna make things worse.
And why don't people realize, like, okay, Jack, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna say this. Why don't men realize this? Like, to not tell women to calm down.
I don't know, because those words
never goes well.
Those words aren't even in my vernacular. Like, I have physically removed my ability to say those words, so I don't know.
Good for you. You're one of the good ones, because whenever it's almost always a man that says it to me, and they're like, calm down, Stephanie. And I'm like, honestly, at this point in your life, like, you're still saying calm down to a woman.
Say that. Yeah.
To an emotional woman, like, come on.
I had a moment that somebody normally, like other partners would have told me, calm down. And my current partner told me, your anxiety brain's on overload right now. And I was like, oh my. That's like perfect. That's the exact, because you're not telling me to calm down. You're just saying, I see what you're going through. Take a moment. And it was like perfect. It gave me a minute to like process what he was saying, and I was like, oh, okay. I told myself, like, oh, I need to calm down. It's like, oh, it's very different when I come to that conclusion than when somebody tells me you need to calm down. Because whenever somebody tells me to just calm down, I'm like, no, that's the exact opposite of what's going to happen here. Get ready.
100%.
The other thing is going to happen. I'm going to calm up.
It's not like when you're losing your shit, you don't realize that you're losing your shit and that it's a little out of control. And if it was so easy to just calm down, you'd fucking do it, because none of us like to lose our shit and to like be out of control. But we're having an emotional response and we're on overload. And so when somebody just says, calm down, you're like, it's so patronizing, and it's so unhelpful. And it does nothing but elevate me from a 10 to 1,000, like
same.
2 seconds flat.
Big
Steph
same.
goes supernova.
Oh, it's bad. And then they're like, Jesus, what's your problem? I'm like, are you serious right now?
Do you value your life?
Own hole at that point, dude.
What's my
dig your own grave.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. But then again, I'm also like, I may be a very stoic person, but I understand the existence of emotions and why we have them and why we feel the way we feel. I understand why we cry and how cathartic it is. And
what a bold statement, man.
Raising boys, I never want them to go through the kind of the childhood. I'm not going to put this on my mother. This wasn't my mother, more just society and friends and stuff, where you're not supposed to show emotion as a guy. And I don't buy into that, because my boys feel very deeply. And I want to encourage that, because I really want to encourage that, hey, just because you have emotional intelligence and emotional awareness does not make you less masculine at all. You can still be a man, and a manly man at that, if that's your choice, who is very in tune with their emotions. And it's not bravery to hide that shit away. It's actually cowardice to hide that shit away when you're like trying to pretend that nothing gets to you. That's cowardice. That's not bravery. That's, I'm not impressed by that. I'm impressed by a guy who's like, hey, like, I'm fucked up right now. There's something going on and I need to talk about it. And it's like, damn, that's bravery for being able to admit that.
Jack,
like,
I want to applaud you for several things. One is for raising those men who are in tune with their emotions. 2 is for not implying that bravery is an inherently masculine quality. Because a lot of times, there's a lot of talk about like being a real man and implying that if you do this, you're a real man, as if there's some virtue to being a real man versus it just being like a genetic
I don't know.
luck of the draw.
No. I
So I really, truly applaud you for that, for saying it's bravery, not like masculinity. And, I truly appreciate and applaud you making those distinctions and, making sure that your kiddos feel comfortable being earnest and sincere and honest with their emotions, because I think that can be tricky. I think you and I are about the same age, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, we're kind of at a weird, you and I are kind of at an odd point culturally where like there was the start of the shift in that direction, but there was still a little bit of that foot in the old.
But still a stigma to it.
Yeah, yep. Exactly. Yep. So, thank you. I think though, to weirdly be able to bring this back, I can't believe how able we are to actually be on point tonight.
We or you? Because I'm not feeling very on point tonight.
You guys are feeding me the good stuff. I think that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a movie that's completely devoid of toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Which is pretty impressive given when it was made. Like, it really says, like, you can both be in tune with your emotions and you can be sensitive to somebody else's shit. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's, in fact, a sign of strength, and that you should be trying to just be kind to people and good to people. And I think that's, like, pretty remarkable, because I know it was, late 80s, early 90s, maybe, when that movie was released? 87. Okay. Yeah. So like to be so devoid of toxic masculinity is really pretty astonishing to me. And maybe it's something that you could do with Steve Martin and John Candy that you couldn't have done with Bruce Willis or Jack, give me another 80s action star, please.
Oh, action star?
Schwarzenegger?
Oh my God.
I don't know.
I mean, you basically
Stallone?
Just said Bruce Willis, but like Schwarzenegger or Stallone or any of those guys.
Right,
Even Kurt Russell. As much as I love Kurt Russell, there's movies that he would work in, and this is not one.
Yeah, no,
I did want to touch on like what you were saying, because you made a very good point, Kelly, that I wanted to touch on. That in any other, and I won't even say that this movie couldn't have worked if it was some other director. I love John Hughes, but I can't say this movie wouldn't have worked with another director. Mm-hmm. But this movie would not have worked with the fact that 98% of the screen time is just these two, without it being anybody other than Steve Martin and John Candy. It takes thespians, and it takes people that you can relate to, and that can draw an audience in. It to carry a movie on two sets of shoulders for the entire runtime essentially is testament to the skill that these guys bring, that are eminently watchable on screen. And you can be like, yep, I could watch these guys. And if there was that cut, I could watch that cut too, and just have more of them. But the fact that it's just these two that carry this whole film basically is astounding.
I don't mean this to undercut their talent or abilities in any way, but do you feel like some of that is also just their personal, like in real life relationship, like their actual friendship? Like,
I would say so.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. Because again, I think they're almost not playing characters. They're kind of playing themselves. Like, I really do feel that there's, they do have obviously emotional moments in the movie, but I think this really is, hey, let's get two buddies on camera playing these loose roles and just watch what happens. And I think they were able to basically just be their goofy ass selves and have a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Anyway.
All right. So I know we probably should be like closing up because it's 11:30 here, and I'm sure it's late where you guys are. So I'm going to just ask a couple of quick rapid fire questions, if that's okay with you guys.
Boy, scary.
Ooh. Be afraid. Be very afraid. What is your favorite Steve Martin movie?
Ooh.
Roxanne.
Three Amigos.
The Jerk.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh.
God, we just named 3 classics.
Yes.
All right. The question alluded to in the beginning, macaroni and cheese.
Macaroni and cheese is life. It is. It is like the sustenance of the gods.
Agreed. I'm with Steph on this. All right, Jack. What's your favorite Thanksgiving side?
Thanksgiving side? Mm-hmm. Broccoli salad.
Oh, what's that?
Homemade broccoli salad.
Is it cold?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's broccoli, it's mayonnaise, which I don't normally like. A little bit of red wine vinegar. You put in chopped up cashews. You put in bacon bits and craisins, and you let it sit overnight, and it is divine. It is.
Christ, I wish you guys could see my face right now. My face is all scrunched up like a little pug. I'm like, ooh, what the hell?
Yeah, I'm a little on the fence about that one, but eggnog, yes or no?
No.
Yes.
Okay. I'm learning a lot about you guys tonight. Parade, yes or no?
Yes.
Steph?
TV or live?
I'm going to go with TV just because Macy's is kind of hard to see live since none of us are in New York.
Live, no.
It doesn't really do it for me. I'm kind of it's not my thing. But a live parade's pretty fun. It's how I feel about sporting events too.
Is there
live
one in
really
Texas
fun,
you go to, or?
No, I don't actually go to them. I'm just saying in theory. Like
she watches from her balcony.
It's fun to watch it live.
Yeah.
I have been to parades, but it's not like I'm like, oh shit, I got to go to the Thanksgiving parade. This is not. Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Black Friday shopping, yes or no?
No.
I'm also
used to
no.
be yes. Now it's an emphatic no.
Okay. Unless it's online. I am an online shopping girl.
Same.
But I'm not going to those fucking stores with all those fucking people. That's just not going to happen.
I worked retail when I was younger, so I have no love for the whole Black Friday experience.
I like Cyber Monday a lot, which it doesn't really exist anymore because everything's online now. But yeah, Cyber Monday used to be my jam.
Yeah, because now Black Friday is like the entire month of November.
Yeah,
so.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Although I was saying that I like this yesterday. Some of the local, or not local, but the small businesses I follow were saying about like, oh, this week we're going to put our Black Friday deals live. And I was like, oh my God, guys, it's supposed to be after Thanksgiving. And I was like, oh my God, this week is Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it snuck up on me.
No idea. Sure. Okay, so that's most of what I wanted to say. Okay, my final thoughts for this movie, and then I think Steph and Jack, you should hit us with your conclusions.
With our best shot.
With your
fire away.
Do it up, Pat Benatar style. Love Pat Benatar. I think this is something that's possibly unique to me, but I'm a big Bob's Burgers fan. Do you guys watch Bob's?
Yes.
Love
yes.
it.
Okay, I feel like Teddy, the handyman, is kind of based on Del. Maybe just watch the show through that lens of like, he's this lonely guy who kind of latches onto the family and is very sweet and good intentioned, but kind of a goofball. So something to keep in mind for anybody who watches. It's very obvious that the Bob's Burgers writers love John Hughes. It shows up a number of places.
Yeah.
My final thoughts on Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is that it's absolutely lovely. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I'm never, ever, ever not happy I watched it. I always feel like it's the perfect way to usher in the overall holiday season. I think it's so warm and charming, and I think that I don't want to say you couldn't make a movie like it now, because I think that's a kind of cop-out, but I also don't think that anybody has made a movie like it recently. Something with as much sincerity and warmth and kindness and earnestness as it has. I think it makes a really strong argument for John Candy as a serious actor, truly a serious actor, because he's very funny in it, but there are points where he's truly heartbreaking as well. And I always knew Steve Martin had that in him. He does that a million times in Roxanne, where you're like, this is an absurdly gifted thespian who's just truly at the peak of his powers. But John Candy, for the most part, was kind of limited to like the funny fat guy role. And I love that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles let him to do a little bit more than just that. Every time you go away, I think Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it gets me a little... Also, sorry, guys.
God damn, that's a good song.
Thank you, Steph. I was just going to say, sorry, guys. I like to pretend to be like a cool girl, but like, I love that song. Can't help it. I hear it and I'm like, yep, I'm so all in on this song.
If we had to sing along right now, like in the movie, I would be so fucking happy. I would just be beside myself.
So good. It's such a good song. So I have no notes. It's a perfect movie. I love it. It makes me feel really good. It's not as profound, for sure, as Pig was, which was absolutely gorgeous and like made me reevaluate the way I live my life. But I love it, and I have none notes. Throwing it over to you, Stephanie.
Hear, hear. So I think that it is such, and I haven't mentioned this before, but it's such a feat to have a film that keeps you laughing the entire time, only to leave you in tears at the end when you realize that it was ultimately really sneakily all along a potent film about love, acceptance, and the ties that bind us in spite of our differences. It's got such a beautiful, the real reason for the season vibe to it without, as we mentioned, ever feeling hokey, heavy-handed, or cheesy. You truly care about these characters, and it's impossible not to love them and root for a happy ending. Hughes' screenplay sizzles. It's a lean 92 minutes, and it doesn't waste a second of its screen time. While he could have easily loaded up the plate with more hijinks and laughs, taking full advantage of the comedic talent at his disposal, he smartly chooses to center the film around the heart of the story. Ultimately, this makes it a better piece of art, and what ensures it has stood the test of time in a way that many comedies ever fail to achieve. There's a sincerity to these characters that triumphs over comedy. You can, should, and absolutely will laugh alongside them, but at the end of the day, you will also love and care for them, and you will feel the depths of their souls and understand what's most important to them, and in return, what's most important to you. There are moments of such surprising significance and gravitas in the midst of chaotic comedy that it takes your breath away. Absolutely, positively, undeniably, no notes. Jack?
How in the hell am I supposed to follow that?
You're the one that always says ladies first.
Yeah, seriously.
True.
All right, Jackomobiles, bring us on home.
Okay, so I'm just going to riff like I always do, straight from the top, and I'm just going to say that unfortunately, I don't agree with Kelly. I think movies like this cannot be made anymore, and I don't think they ever will be made anymore. And there's a part of me that's saddened by that, because I hesitate to say that I can think of another movie, another R-rated comedy that is genuinely as wholesome as this one, where in modern movies, R rating, they would take it to extremes and really lose sight of what this movie is about. And one of the best parts about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is not necessarily also what's in it, but what isn't in it. And it really just takes the concept of two people desperate to get home through any means necessary and the hijinks that ensues and distills it down into this just core element of forgiveness, acceptance, loss, growth, and beautifully shows it to you and does not tell it to you. And I don't think that is really prevalent in filmmaking anymore. And it is kind of sad that we won't see necessarily films quite like this anymore. I think if you're one of the two people on the planet who has not seen this movie, or if you haven't watched it in a while, I think you owe it to yourself during this holiday season to check this film out. It's not the movie you remember from your childhood. It's honestly better than what you remember. And I can't say that about a lot of movies from my childhood. They may be good, but they weren't as good, where this one is better, watching it through the lens of an adult and really seeing the emotion at play that's creeping in through the edges, and the message that it sends home is like I said, I'd be hard pressed to find a more wholesome R-rated movie out there. Absolutely no notes whatsoever.
Yay!
Beautiful. So great pick, Kelly. That was a perfect film, and especially for this time of year.
Enjoyed it.
Loved it. So before we say goodbye, just a real quick update for our listeners. In the spirit of this beautiful movie, we're going to be taking the month of December off for some much needed R&R and some really special family time, spend time with our loved ones. But we will be back in January with Jack's pick, and you're going to have to stay tuned to find out exactly what that will be. But just stay with us, and we hope you all have an incredible holiday season and get to embrace the spirit of the holidays in the way that this movie encourages us to do. And that is our show. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this foray into film passion. If you did like what you heard, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on iTunes. That really, really helps get the word out and helps more people discover us. And remember, in a mad, mad world, movies help remind us of our humanity and capacity for great beauty. Film criticism is important, but film celebration is essential. Until next time, take note of the movies that matter and join us in proudly proclaiming no notes.
Oh my gosh.
Oh shit. And we like smoke a cigar and we just sort of like
See, now you're talking about
We all
read
wear
some poetry and
Yep.
oh, I have suspenders.
Of
Oh,
course
this is
you
very
do.
exciting to me. Of course I do. Why wouldn't
Lounge slippers and yes.
I? Absolutely. Dressing robes, all the everything that a woman should have.